Everybody, welcome to JUS 261. My name is Jim Doyle and I'll be your instructor for the course. Every week what I do is I provide a mini lecture in which I go over some of the key concepts associated with the major writing assignment for the week. And basically what I do is I work off of the grading rubric and assignment guidelines. So this week we have to do a short paper on the federal court system. And so I want to just touch upon some of the key concepts that I think are important for you to understand as you begin to work on this paper and as you begin to read the chapters of the textbook. I also have an announcement this week, and inside the announcement there should be a short video on the federal court system. So if you have time, you might take a look at that because I think that will add to our discussion and just further explain how the process or how the structure of the federal courts exists. We're all getting used to Brightspace, so if at any time I post something and it tells you you can't open something, please let me know so I can go ahead and try to correct that. Some things from Blackboard aren't transferred over to Brightspace, and so if you ever run into that, let me know. So far I think everything has been working pretty good, but if that pops up, let me know. Okay, so let me disappear here for a minute. We can get into talking about the tiers within the federal court system. So let's talk about the tiers. It said describe the three tiers of the American federal court system. Those three tiers are the United States District Court, United States Courts of Appeal, and United States Supreme Court. Now, in our textbook, you will find information about the number of U.S. district courts, districts within the United States, the number of United States Circuit Courts of Appeals that exist within the United States, and obviously here in this country we just have one national Supreme Court, and that's the United States Supreme Court. So as you begin to evaluate these courts and describe them for me, make sure you include some of these specific details because that's going to help you out here as you include specific examples based on research. So provide me some more detailed information other than just basically describing the three types of courts that we have under the federal system. Okay, so give me some specific information, and much of this can be gleaned from the textbook or probably from that short little video that I posted in my announcement. So we know what the tiers are. Let's talk about the roles. So we have the roles for the United States District Courts, the United States Courts of Appeals, and the United States Supreme Court. Well, the United States District Court is the workhorse of the federal judicial system. It has original jurisdiction on virtually all cases. In other words, most cases that enter the federal judicial system begin at the district court level. For example, bank robbery. Our scenario for this assignment is dealing with a bank robbery. And bank robbery is a federal violation. And that's under Title 18, Section 2113 of the United States Code. So it is a federal crime. So for our purposes of this, our final project, then we're going to consider it a federal crime because the federal courts have jurisdiction because it is a violation of federal law. So the U.S. District Courts have original jurisdiction, again, on virtually all cases, civil, criminal, constitutional violations. It runs the gamut, and it all begins at the district court level. Okay, so that's their role. They're the trial court. It's the only court in the federal judicial system in which lawyers argue in front of juries over the facts of the case and hope to get a verdict in their particular favor. Now, if we look at the United States Courts of Appeals, the United States Courts of Appeal has a very important role, and that role is to hear appeals from the district courts. And unlike the United States Supreme Court, the United States Courts of Appeals cannot discriminate the types of cases that they hear. So they will deal with both routine and highly important matters on appeal. And so that makes it a very busy court. It's an unassuming court. Most people don't know the significance of it. But most legal matters end at the United States Courts of Appeals because the United States Supreme Court obviously cannot hear every appeal. They're very limited on the number of cases that they hear. And so the United States Courts of Appeals is a very important role. It also is important because it interprets statutes for the lower courts through the decisions that they make. So if a decision comes up from a district court within that circuit and the judges rule a particular way, then that is a means for the lower courts to understand how that statute, for example, or that decision should be interpreted. It provides an administrative review of the courts within the circuit, but it also serves as a error corrector. In other words, they correct errors made in the district court decisions, in their rulings, and they provide guidance to the district courts. All right. They also sort out and develop those cases worthy of Supreme Court review. So these are the courts that are going to see the cases that they will know from their judicial experience are most likely to reach the United States Supreme Court or to be strongly considered by the United States Supreme Court. So that is, again, another key role. They are policymakers. They interpret the law. They interpret the law. They provide corrections for the lower courts, as we discussed. And then again, they sort out and develop those cases that are worthy of Supreme Court review. But remember, their decisions are more localized because their decisions only apply to the district courts within the circuit and the states within the circuit. Okay, so if the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals rules a particular, makes a ruling regarding the police use of force, that decision is only binding in the Ninth Circuit. So the states that encompass the Ninth Circuit, which is mostly the western half of the United States, those are the states that are obligated to follow that decision. Other states and other circuits are not obligated to follow that decision. That's the key role of the United States Supreme Court. So the decisions of the United States Courts of Appeal are more regional in nature, and the decisions by the United States Supreme Court have a more national basis and impact national policy. Now, the role of the Supreme Court, again, it is the final interpreter of the federal Constitution. It has to maintain balance between states and national government to the maintenance of the rights and duties of an individual. They hear cases that are of a significant constitutional issue, for example, police use of force. They also have original jurisdiction on cases, for example, cases involving one state against another. So let's say California is suing Arizona over water rights to the Colorado River water. That would automatically be heard at the United States Supreme Court. Or if a state has a legal issue with the federal government, then that case would be heard by the United States Supreme Court as well. So those are the original jurisdiction. In other words, the case would automatically begin there and end there. There is necessarily no appeal after that, because these are things that need to be quickly resolved for the expediency of government. So the key roles, again, for the Supreme Court, in that it also serves as a policymaker from the fact that it interprets the law and it grapples with the most important policy matters. And for example, we're talking about racial equality. We could talk about abortion. We could talk about gay marriage. We could talk about police use of force. Those are all important policy matters that have national implications that the United States Supreme Court hears. So those are the type of cases that they hear. They'll also hear cases in which there are conflicts within the circuit. For example, two different circuit courts of appeals might hear a case that has the same basic fact pattern and rule totally differently. And the Supreme Court would most likely hear those appeals only because part of their job is to provide guidance and consistency within the circuits for the interpretation of the law. Okay, so that's their roles. Again, some of the type of cases that they might hear, we talked about some of them. U.S. Supreme Court, again, will handle cases that they think have national constitutional importance or a significant public policy issue. The circuit courts, again, they can't limit themselves to the type of cases they hear. They hear both routine and highly important matters. And then the U.S. District Court, again, is the workhorse virtually every case that enters the United States federal court system begins at the district court level. So we talked about the tiers, the roles, and the types of cases. So let's talk about the process real quick. The process here for this particular part of the question is something that you need to address separately. Right? Students in the past have either brushed over this or thought they might have touched on it within the context of discussing tiers, roles, and cases, but this is a separate prompt, a separate critical element that you need to address. So it says, explain the process by which a case might reach the United States Supreme Court, identifying any other court or courts in which a case might be heard between the trial court and the United States Supreme Court. And so the best thing to do is to think about a case that maybe arose from your particular area, or if there's a case that interests you, how did it reach the United States Supreme Court? One of the cases that I often discuss for this particular example is the case involving Proposition 8 in California. And Proposition 8 in California was a proposition that was passed by the voters in California that basically said marriage is to be considered a union between a man and a woman only. And so this proposition passed in California, and two same-sex couples challenged the legality of this law, the constitutionality of this law, by filing a due process and equal protection clause violation in the United States District Court for the Northern District of California. So they started out at the U.S. District Court level. U.S. District Court made a decision that ruled against the Proposition 8 advocates and found that the Proposition 8 did in fact violate the due process clause and equal protection clause of the Constitution, and found that proposition to be null and void. Well, the proponents of Proposition 8 then appealed to the United States Circuit Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. That's where California lies. California lies in the Ninth Circuit. The United States Circuit Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit heard the case, and the judges ruled in favor of the federal court decision. In other words, they too believed that Proposition 8 violated the constitutional rights of same-sex couples who wish to get married, specifically violated the due process clause and the equal protection clause. The proponents then appealed to the United States Supreme Court, and the United States Supreme Court, in a complicated ruling, but nonetheless decided that Proposition 8 was unconstitutional and that states could not restrict marriage to be only between a man and a woman. And so basically it heard this case because of the national importance, the significance of this issue, and basically ruled that states cannot discriminate between same-sex couples who wish to get married just like heterosexuals. So that is an example on how a case might reach the United States Supreme Court. Okay? So our textbook is ripe with information. So make sure you read the chapters this week and get a handle on the issues for the week. Specifically, looks like Chapter 2, the federal judicial system, and Chapter 6 on federal judges. So make sure you read those chapters carefully. Make sure you also take a look at my announcements. And the announcements are designed to add more clarity to some concepts and provide you with some additional information. And usually I try to include some short type of videos that I think would be very beneficial to you. Okay? So again, make sure you go over the short paper guidelines and rubric. So this is it. This is what I'm looking for, the critical elements. This is what you will be evaluated upon, the tiers, the roles, the types of cases, process. Here's what it takes to receive an exemplary rating, proficiency rating, areas that you I think you might need to improve upon. The importance of heeding my feedback is that many of our writing assignments that you're going to be dealing with are going to be directly applicable to our final project. So you're not going to have to reinvent the wheel. You're just going to have to polish and fine-tune the wheel as we get closer to the end. Okay, so I hope this helps. helps. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ever contact me. Thank you.